Today we're looking at the highly anticipated Too Human, and it seems to be a bit of a divider. The demo was hugely successful amongst gamers, but the game itself has been given a pretty hard time by the press. Now on paper, with its super cool Cyber Norse plot and its deep blending of action and RPG, it's the kind of game it would be impossible not to love. And having played it through, I do think it's a good game, but I can see why it's splitting opinions. Despite the RPG elements and character levelling, the game consists predominantly of running through linear levels, fighting wave after wave of random enemies until you get to a boss. This can get a little repetitive, although dropping into cyberspace to open up the next sections of the game is a really neat idea that breaks things up a bit and reminds you of the epic feel that the plot seeks to engender. Your attack controls have been mapped to the right thumbstick, which does take a little while to get used to and achieve any precision with, but in melee can become quite elegant and fluid. Now obviously this means you lose camera control, and while the camera isn't brilliant, it's not full-on bad. Guns are very hard to master though, and it can feel like a real battle in itself to get the auto lock-on to clip to what you want it to. The randomisation of enemies and levels really helps keep variety if you want to replay bits of the game to level up your character once you finish the campaign, but there is a certain amount of satisfaction in clearing a particularly difficult but well choreographed set room that action gamers might miss. Personally, I would have preferred to see a greater range of enemy types, but the way that enemies evolve to match your level is good at keeping you on your toes even when you're pimped out to the nines. Another double-edged sword is that death is actually quite forgiving. You don't lose any newly acquired armour, and enemies you've taken out or damage dealt in that encounter so far is remembered. Now certainly in the early stages, where you're still getting used to the controls, not having to start boss battles over each time is a welcome relief, but it does take some of the challenge and then the subsequent glory out of it, being able to just pick away until it's done. The loot drops are frequent and generous, with lots of sexy weapons and armour to get all drooly about and show off to your friends. Again, this is good and bad. For my taste, I think there's a little bit too much. I mean, you don't really have time to savour each new item before something better comes along and you switch it out, so upgrades start to feel commonplace, and you also spend a lot of time popping into your equipment menu, which interrupts the flow of the game. But for a lot of gamers, this will be a highly popular aspect and just what they want to keep them pushing forward. In terms of presentation, the lack of load times is incredibly impressive, and the design generally pretty strong. Combat can look stunning, although the graphics in some of the cutscenes are a little clunkier than they could be. The soundtrack is impressive and evocative, but some of the dialogue can be a little cliched. The plot is chock full of interesting and epic ideas, but there is a lack of coherence, which could perhaps be mitigated by a greater feeling of involvement with the narrative and structure in the gameplay itself. There's also a definite lack of explanation. While choosing a class and allotting skill points is all straightforward enough, lots of the cooler ideas such as runes and charms, which will allow you a much greater depth of customization, aren't explained. And there's also no information about what all the armour and weapon stats mean. There's a lot going on, but it can be quite bewildering at first. In conclusion, Too Human suffers from the fact that the plot and gameplay concepts were so exciting that the game, while good, disappoints in falling slightly short of that very highly set bar. But there is enjoyment to be had from playing this, and the potential here to elevate this setting to something really special in the next instalment if Silicon Knights wants to. This just about makes it to 4 stars.